Leave now and don't come back. My father's voice boomed through the dining room, his expression contorted with fury and letdown. The untouched Thanksgiving bird remained positioned between us while his declaration reverberated throughout our San Diego family residence. I remained motionless, shocked by the poison in his tone, my utensil suspended midway to my lips. The cranberry relish suddenly became acrid, and I experienced the recognizable burden of his demands pressing upon me like a tangible weight. I am Belle Hampton, 28 years of age, and I had just destroyed my father's meticulously crafted vision for our family's future. Throughout my memory, Douglas Hampton had directed every element of my existence toward one specific objective: becoming part of the esteemed Hampton and Associates legal practice that carried our surname. My sibling Chase had complied flawlessly, completing Harvard Law and transitioning smoothly into his position as associate partner. However, I had always been distinct, constantly inquiring, perpetually attracted to something greater than billable time and business disputes. The instant I informed my father of my official departure from law school, I witnessed 28 years of his commitment to me collapse in front of his gaze. He had invested decades constructing Hampton and Associates into one of San Diego's most honored family legal establishments, and in his perspective, I had simply discarded it all. My mother, Janine, remained immobile next to him, her wine goblet shaking slightly in her polished fingers. She had mastered the skill of quiet compliance through the years, never confronting my father's blueprint for our family's destiny. "You bring shame to everything this household has created," Douglas went on, his tone lowering to a menacing murmur that somehow seemed more intimidating than his yelling. "I have given up everything to provide you with chances, and this is your way of showing gratitude." I placed my utensil down deliberately, sensing something frigid and resolute forming in my chest. The letdown wasn't unfamiliar, but the conclusiveness in his speech was. Chase moved restlessly in his seat, his gaze locked on his dish as though the mashed potatoes contained universal mysteries. Even at 34 years old, he remained unable to stand up for me against our father's fury. "Following all my efforts for you," Douglas declared, rising so suddenly that his seat scraped across the wooden flooring. "Leave my residence. Depart and never return." My mother's sharp gasp was the sole noise in the space as I gradually rose, placing my napkin tidily next to my dish. The ceremony of family meals had transformed into a show we all engaged in, but this evening the performance had finally concluded. While I moved toward the exit, I sensed their gazes upon my shoulders, yet no one attempted to halt me. The quietness conveyed more than any spoken words possibly could. Growing up within the Hampton family meant existing under the perpetual stress of accomplishment and public image. My father had constructed his standing upon the basis of family principles and heritage. Paradoxically, while keeping emotional distance from his own offspring, Chase had consistently been the favored child, the one who posed appropriate questions and made correct decisions. He completed his studies with highest honors from Harvard, succeeded on his bar examination initially, and effortlessly moved into the family enterprise without ever questioning if it aligned with his genuine desires. Conversely, I had consistently been the troublesome daughter. While Chase focused on corporate law and tax matters, I felt attracted to environmental studies and social enterprise. Throughout my college years at UC San Diego, I dedicated my summers to volunteering with sustainable development groups rather than working at prominent legal offices. My father endured these interests provided I kept up my academic performance and remained committed to law school. The strain between us had been increasing for years, reaching a crisis during my second year at Stanford Law. I found myself in a contracts lecture, listening to an instructor discuss breach remedies monotonously, when I understood I was gradually withering internally. Each case examination felt like another step toward burying my genuine identity. That night, I contacted my former roommate from 3 years prior, Maya, who was employed with a female-managed venture capital firm in Los Angeles. "I have a concept," I informed her, walking around my small campus apartment. "Solar-powered infrastructure packages for developing regions. Modular systems capable of delivering clean energy and internet access to isolated areas." Maya paid close attention as I described my vision. The necessary technology existed, but no one had determined how to make it obtainable and cost-effective for communities requiring it most. I had been investigating this idea for months, creating business frameworks on napkins and staying awake late studying microfinance and social impact investment. You should present this to Vidian Capital, Maya recommended. They seek precisely this type of innovation. That discussion transformed everything. Within 7 days, I had discreetly left Stanford and relocated to a cramped shared workspace in Venice Beach. My parents believed I was taking a brief break to discover myself, and I allowed them to maintain that assumption. Chase contacted me periodically to monitor my situation, but our discussions consistently seemed forced and cautious, as though we both feared expressing something inappropriate. For 9 months, I survived on my accumulated savings and consumed instant noodles while refining my presentation. I sent proposals to 17 different investment firms and received 17 denials. Some were standard responses, others provided more detailed feedback regarding market feasibility and expansion concerns. Each rejection was painful, yet it also provided valuable lessons about persistence and resolve. My parents never inquired about the details of my law school absence, and I never offered information. The less they understood, the better. I was developing something groundbreaking, something capable of genuinely transforming lives, but I understood they would never comprehend it. The significant moment arrived on a rain-drenched Tuesday in March, precisely 9 months after beginning this path. I sat in the confined Venice Beach workspace, surrounded by empty coffee containers and wrinkled papers, when my telephone rang. The displayed number was unfamiliar, but intuition told me to respond. Bell Hampton. This is Jessica Chen from Vidian Capital. We would like to arrange a meeting regarding your Sun Nest Systems proposal. My hands began trembling as I absorbed her statement. Vidian Capital represented one of the most respected social impact investment companies on the West Coast, managed by women who had achieved success in technology and now dedicated themselves to supporting companies that could generate positive change. I had submitted my proposal to them 4 months earlier and presumed it had been overlooked when I never received a response. The meeting occurred the subsequent week in their elegant downtown Los Angeles headquarters. I wore my sole professional outfit and carried a weathered leather case that had belonged to my grandfather. The conference space overlooked the urban skyline, and I attempted not to let the imposing environment undermine my confidence as I prepared my presentation. Jessica presented me to the other partners. Dr. Amara Okafor, a Nigerian-born engineer who had transformed water purification technology, and Lisa Brennan, a former Goldman Sachs executive who had departed Wall Street to concentrate on sustainable investment. These were women who had overcome obstacles and forged their own routes, and I felt optimistic that perhaps they would grasp my vision. I delivered my solar infrastructure concept with enthusiastic precision, describing how modular energy systems could be implemented in rural communities throughout Africa and South America. The technology extended beyond simply providing electricity. It focused on establishing connectivity, facilitating education, and strengthening local economies. Each package would contain solar panels, battery storage, LED illumination, and satellite internet capabilities, all contained in a weather-resistant unit that local technicians could assemble. The market analysis demonstrates enormous demand, I explained, advancing through slides that illustrated the extent of energy poverty globally. 2 billion individuals still lack dependable electricity access, and conventional grid infrastructure costs are prohibitively expensive for remote communities. Dr. Okafor leaned closer, clearly interested. What is your expansion strategy? How do you intend to manufacture and distribute these systems affordably? I had expected this inquiry and spent weeks establishing partnerships with manufacturers in Southeast Asia who specialized in renewable energy components. The solution was creating standardized modules that could be produced efficiently while maintaining quality standards. We collaborate with established manufacturers and concentrate on assembly and implementation, I responded. Our competitive advantage isn't in redesigning solar technology. It's in making it accessible and sustainable for communities that require it most. The meeting continued for 2 hours, and by conclusion, I could observe genuine enthusiasm in their expressions. Jessica accompanied me to the elevator, and her final words provided hope. "We will contact you shortly. This represents exactly the innovation we seek." That evening, I called Maya to share the development, but I didn't inform my family. They still believed I was taking a temporary break from law school. The call from Vidian Capital came 3 weeks later, transforming everything. Jessica's voice carried warmth but remained professional as she shared the news that would change my life. "Belle, we would like to offer Sun Nest Systems $30 million in Series A funding with additional commitment for Series B if you achieve your first-year deployment objectives." I nearly dropped the phone. $30 million exceeded anything I had imagined, sufficient to launch operations across 3 continents and establish the manufacturing partnerships necessary for rapid scaling. The terms were generous too. Vidian would acquire a 40% stake in the company, leaving me with controlling interest and operational freedom according to my vision. "There is one requirement," Jessica continued. "We want you to accept a position on the California Renewable Council. It's a state advisory board that evaluates green energy initiatives and distributes federal grants. Your expertise would be valuable, and it would provide Sun Nest additional market credibility." The California Renewable Council was prestigious, comprised of leading experts in sustainable technology and environmental policy. Membership required invitation only, typically reserved for executives with decades of experience. At 28, I would become one of the youngest appointees in the council's history. "I am honored," I replied, still processing the magnitude of what was occurring. "When would I begin?" "Immediately. We are announcing the funding next month, and the council appointment will be included in the press release. This will establish your market presence significantly, Belle." After ending the call, I sat in stunned silence in my tiny Venice Beach apartment. 9 months earlier, I had been a law school dropout, eating instant noodles and questioning every decision I had made. Now, I was about to become the chief strategy officer of a $30 million company with operations spanning multiple continents. The following weeks passed rapidly with legal documents, media interviews, and strategic planning sessions. Vidian's team assisted me in establishing proper corporate structure, hiring key personnel, and beginning the process of setting up manufacturing partnerships. I moved from my cramped apartment to a modern Santa Monica loft, finally able to purchase furniture that didn't originate from second-hand stores. The press coverage was overwhelming. TechCrunch featured Sun Nest Systems as one of the top social impact startups to monitor, and Forbes included me in their 30 Under 30 list for social entrepreneurship. The attention was satisfying but also surreal. I kept expecting someone to inform me there had been an error. Throughout it all, my family remained unaware of my success. I had perfected the skill of deflecting their questions about my plans, providing vague responses about exploring opportunities and taking time to determine my direction. My father had ceased asking entirely after our last uncomfortable phone conversation when he had again recommended I consider returning to law school before it became too late. Chase called occasionally, but our conversations felt increasingly distant. He was occupied with a high-profile divorce case generating significant media attention for Hampton and Associates, and I could tell he was frustrated by my apparent lack of direction. In his mind, I was squandering my potential while he was advancing his career and contributing to the family legacy. "Dad is genuinely concerned about you," he said during one of our infrequent phone calls. "He believes you are experiencing some kind of quarter-life crisis." I almost laughed at the irony. While my father worried about my supposed crisis, I was building something that would outlast his law firm by decades. But I kept that knowledge private, understanding that the revelation would be more satisfying if it came as a complete surprise. The California Renewable Council position was officially announced in October, generating another wave of media coverage. My appointment was noted in several legal publications, including the California Bar Journal, but I didn't think my family paid attention to environmental news. The gap between my public success and my family's perception of my failure was widening daily. As Thanksgiving approached, the tension between my two worlds became almost unbearable. In the business world, I was being recognized as an innovative leader in sustainable technology. Sun Nest Systems had deployed our first pilot programs in Kenya and Guatemala, providing clean energy to over 5,000 people in remote communities. The success stories were abundant. Children studying by LED light instead of dangerous kerosene lamps, small businesses operating refrigeration units for the first time, and community centers offering internet access for education and communication. But to my family, I remained the disappointing daughter who had abandoned her legal career for undefined pursuits. The disconnect was painful, especially when I received updates about Hampton and Associates' continued growth and success. My father had recently been honored by the San Diego Bar Association for his contributions to family law, and Chase was being considered for partnership ahead of schedule. I found myself torn between the desire to share my achievements and the strategic value of maintaining my secret. Part of me wanted to prove to my father that I had made the correct choice, that departing from law school had led to something far more meaningful than partnership in his firm. But another part of me recognized that the element of surprise would be more powerful than gradual revelation. The week before Thanksgiving, I made a decision that would change everything. I purchased a $7 million oceanfront mansion in Malibu, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific Ocean and private beach access. The house symbolized my success, but more importantly, it was a statement of independence. I was no longer the lost daughter living on borrowed time and good intentions. The real estate transaction generated its own media attention as celebrity news outlets speculated about the young tech executive who had purchased one of Malibu's most exclusive properties. The attention made me nervous, but I assumed my family was too focused on their own concerns to notice entertainment news about property purchases. I spent the days leading up to Thanksgiving carefully preparing for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. My family expected me to announce my plans for returning to law school, or at least acknowledge that my experimental phase had failed. Instead, I was going to tell them the truth about my withdrawal and let them draw their own conclusions about my current situation. The morning of Thanksgiving, I drove from Malibu to my parents' house in La Jolla, taking the scenic coastal route that had always calmed my nerves. The familiar neighborhoods looked different now that I was viewing them from a position of financial success rather than dependence. I parked outside the house where I had grown up, noting how modest it seemed compared to my new Malibu estate. My mother greeted me at the door with her usual mixture of affection and concern. "Belle, you look wonderful. How are you feeling about everything?" Everything was her diplomatic way of referring to my extended absence from law school without acknowledging the growing elephant in the room. I hugged her and followed her into the kitchen where the familiar sounds and smells of Thanksgiving preparation transported me back to childhood memories of family gatherings that had felt warmer and more genuine. Chase arrived with his girlfriend, Kelly, a fellow attorney who worked at a competing firm. They made the perfect legal power couple, discussing recent cases and bar association politics with the easy confidence of people who had never questioned their career paths. Kelly had always been polite to me, but I could sense her confusion about my current status as the family disappointment. As we gathered around the dining room table, I knew this would be the last Thanksgiving where my family saw me as a failure. The conversation I had been dreading began innocently enough, as family conversations often do. We had finished the main course, and my mother was clearing plates while my father poured wine with the ceremonial precision he brought to everything. Chase and Kelly were discussing a recent Supreme Court decision that could impact family law practices, and I found myself genuinely interested in their analysis despite my own divergent path. "Belle," my father said suddenly, turning his attention to me with the focused intensity that had intimidated me since childhood. "I have been patient about this whole sabbatical situation, but we need to discuss your plans. Spring semester starts in 2 months, and if you are going to re-enroll at Stanford, we need to handle the paperwork soon." The assumption in his voice was clear. Of course, I would be returning to law school because what other reasonable option could there be? My mother nodded encouragingly from the kitchen doorway, clearly hoping this conversation would resolve the uncertainty that had been hanging over our family gatherings. "Actually, Dad," I said, setting down my wine glass carefully, "I am not taking a sabbatical. I officially withdrew from Stanford 8 months ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Kelly stopped mid-sentence in her conversation with Chase, and I could see my mother's face pale as she processed what I had just said. My father's expression shifted from confusion to anger so quickly that I almost flinched. "You what?" he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I withdrew from law school," I repeated, meeting his gaze directly. I realized it wasn't the right path for me, so I left to pursue something else. Chase leaned forward, clearly trying to mediate before the situation exploded. "Belle, maybe we can discuss options for reapplying next year. There are other good law schools that might." "You don't understand," I interrupted. "I am not planning to return to law school ever. I have started a company, and it has been incredibly successful." My father's face was turning red, and I could see the vein in his temple that always appeared when he was truly angry. "A company? What kind of company?" "Some little internet startup that will be bankrupt in 6 months. Sun Nest Systems," I said simply. "We develop solar-powered infrastructure for developing communities. We just closed $30 million in series of funding." The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. I watched my family's faces as they tried to process what I had just told them. $30 million was more money than Hampton and Associates had generated in revenue over its entire 30-year history. "That's impossible," my father said flatly. "You have been out of school for 8 months. Nobody raises that kind of money without experience or credentials." "I have both," I replied calmly. "I spent 2 years developing the technology and business model while I was supposedly studying contracts and torts. And as of last month, I was appointed to the California Renewable Council." Kelly's eyes widened with recognition. "The Renewable Council. That is incredibly prestigious. My firm has tried to get clients appointed to that board for years." My father stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that made everyone wince. "You are lying," he said, his voice filled with a combination of rage and disbelief. "This is some elaborate fantasy you have constructed to justify throwing away your education." "I am not lying," I said, remaining seated while he towered over me. "But clearly you would rather believe that I am delusional than accept that I have succeeded without following your plan." That's when he exploded with the words that would end our relationship forever. The following morning, I drove directly from my parents' house to my new Malibu mansion, my father's words still echoing in my ears. "Get out and stay out," had been his final statement before I walked out of their dining room for what I knew would be the last time. The 20-minute drive along the Pacific Coast Highway gave me time to process what had just happened and to plan my next steps. My phone had been buzzing constantly since I left La Jolla, with missed calls from Chase and several text messages from my mother asking me to call them back. I ignored them all. The time for explanations and reconciliation had passed the moment my father chose to believe his own assumptions rather than listen to the truth about my success. The moving truck arrived at noon, carrying the minimal belongings I had accumulated during my years of struggling to build Sun Nest Systems. Everything fit easily into 2 rooms of my sprawling new home, a stark reminder of how dramatically my circumstances had changed. As I unpacked my laptop and the framed photo of my first solar installation in Kenya, I felt a mixture of sadness and liberation that surprised me with its intensity. That afternoon, I called Jessica at Vidian Capital to discuss the timeline for our expansion into Central America. The conversation was energizing, focusing on concrete plans for deploying our technology to communities that desperately needed reliable energy access. As we talked about manufacturing partnerships and government approvals, I realized how much more fulfilling this work was than any legal career could have been. "By the way," Jessica mentioned near the end of our call, "we are getting some interesting inquiries about potential partnerships. Several law firms are reaching out about pro bono opportunities to support our community development work." "Really?" I said, suddenly interested. "What kind of firms?" "Mostly environmental law specialists, but a few family practices too. There is apparently significant interest in the corporate social responsibility angle." I made a mental note to review those partnership proposals carefully. The irony of law firms wanting to associate with my success wasn't lost on me, especially considering my father's complete dismissal of my achievements just hours earlier. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, I was reviewing grant applications in my home office when my assistant called with an urgent update. "Belle, I thought you should know that Hampton and Associates submitted an application for the state renewable energy grant program. They are requesting $2 million for a sustainability initiative." I almost laughed out loud. Hampton and Associates had never shown any interest in environmental issues during my entire childhood. The fact that they were suddenly pursuing green energy grants seemed like a transparent attempt to capitalize on the growing market for sustainable legal services. "What is the nature of their application?" I asked, pulling up the California Renewable Council database on my computer. "They are proposing to establish a pro bono legal clinic focused on environmental justice issues. The grant would fund 3 years of operations, including staff salaries and community outreach programs. As a council member, I had access to review all grant applications before they were evaluated by the full committee. I opened Hampton and Associates' submission and read through it carefully, noting the ambitious goals and impressive-sounding initiatives. The proposal was well-written and professionally presented, exactly what I would have expected from my father's firm. But there was one critical problem that the other council members wouldn't immediately recognize. Hampton and Associates had no experience in environmental law, no existing relationships with environmental justice organizations, and no track record of supporting sustainable initiatives. The application was essentially a request for $2 million to enter a field they had never shown interest in pursuing. More importantly, there was a clear conflict of interest that would disqualify their application automatically. I scrolled to the bottom of the council database entry and found the field I was looking for: potential conflicts. I typed carefully, knowing that my words would determine the fate of my father's grant application. Sun Nest Systems Executive Relationship, I wrote, adding my name and title for clarity. The rejection would be swift and public, visible to everyone in San Diego's legal community. As I submitted the conflict notice that would deny my father's grant application, I realized that revenge had found me rather than the other way around. The path I had chosen for authentic reasons had led to a moment of perfect justice that no amount of planning could have orchestrated better. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living successfully according to your own values and letting the consequences reveal themselves naturally.